Opportunities to get out of your comfort zone, learn a little something new here today. So good afternoon and welcome. My name's Gina Kessler-Lee. I'm a librarian here at St. Mary's. And before we begin, I just wanted to express my deep gratitude to all of the folks here on campus who helped to make this event happen. So big shout out to our sponsors from the library, Jan Term, College Committee on Inclusive Excellence, the Communication Department, the Roy E. and Patricia Disney Forum, the Intercultural Center, Ethnic Studies, the Elfenwork Center for Responsible Business. Yeah, there's a lot of folks that helped to make this happen. SILSA, the Kalamenovitz School of Education, Women's and Gender Studies, the Student Success Office, and Student Engagement and Academic Success. So thank you all. And thank you also to my colleagues from across campus who helped arrange all the logistics for today. One last thing is I also want to point out the feedback slips on your chair, so there will be a prize for one lucky respondent. So please answer the question after the talk, and you can just leave it on your chair afterwards and we'll collect them. Are there any seats available? I know there's some folks standing in the back. Does anyone have any empty seats? Raise your hand. Yeah, right over there. One back there, if y'all want to have a seat. Okay, one in the second row up here, one in the middle there. Yeah, or, have a seat around the edges or up here in front too. We can make a little seated row up front too, that's fine. Want to make sure that as many folks as possible can be here to see this. So, for me, one of the great privileges of working at a college is that you're constantly surrounded by opportunities for lifelong learning and growth. And every once in a while, one of those opportunities introduces you to someone doing something completely different, someone speaking truth to power, and you learn something that profoundly impacts your thinking and your practice. For me, that happened at an academic libraries conference last spring. The keynote speaker had me on the edge of my seat, with my eyes wide and my mind blown. She called into question so many things that I took for granted about the technologies that control my life, and she put into words so many things that had quietly troubled me deep down. As she concluded her keynote speech at this conference, my first thought was, I will never look at a Google search the same way again. And my second thought was, I need my colleagues and students to hear this too. That keynote speaker, of course, was Safiya Umoja Noble. Ever since then, my colleagues in the library and I have incorporated Dr. Noble's findings into our classes for first years up through graduate students and even for staff and faculty. Because Dr. Noble's work at the intersection of information literacy and social justice carries important lessons for anyone who uses or creates information technology. And our job as librarians is not just to buy books and show you how to use the library databases. It is to lead you to critically examine how and where and why you get your information and make better decisions accordingly. So I'm absolutely delighted that Dr. Noble is able to join us and speak to you directly today. Dr. Safiya Umoja Noble is an assistant professor in the Department of Information Studies in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. She also holds appointments in the departments of African American Studies, Gender Studies, and Education. Her research on the design and use of applications on the internet is at the intersection of race, gender, culture, and technology. Her latest book, Algorithms of Oppression, Data Discrimination in the Digital Age, will be published by New York University Press later this year. So please welcome Safiya Umoja Noble.
Thank you. That was the toughest introduction I'm ever going to have to live up to, so I just want to throw that out there. Thank you so much, Gina, for the gracious invitation. This is such a beautiful campus, and all of the people that I've met just so far today have been amazing. And hey, how can I be down? Don't tell UCLA I said that. But I mean, this is a beautiful place. I love it. And just the energy and the passion that you all have, and certainly that you have come out and so generously heard me when I understand there are courses like in swim-up bars and wine tasting and chocolate and stuff like that going on. I don't know. I can't really compete with that, but I do appreciate that you took a few minutes to come out and hear what I have to say. And so I thought I would bring some field notes from critical information studies. And if you don't know what critical information studies is, it's really kind of this intersection of people who are working in traditional fields like library science and information science, but also communications, ethnic studies, gender studies. It's kind of a place where we converge. It's a very small little subset of people working in information studies who are doing the critical work. And when I say critical, I don't just mean like a downer and depressing. I mean people who have a power analysis about the technologies that we use or the information that we're engaging with. And so that will be a driving kind of primary theme in my talk today. And one of the things that I thought might be helpful, I'm going to talk a little bit in the kind of second half of this talk this morning. And Gina, you have to give me like a cut it, because I really feel so passionately about the work that I've been doing. But the second half, I'll talk a little bit more about what's happening in the book. And the first half, I thought I would start with kind of a well-known failure and what we can learn from the failure. And the failure is one of those kinds of things that if you're in information technology, you want the failures so that you know that you're kind of testing appropriately. So I'll be talking about Google and a lot of its failures. And people, I find, when I talk about Google, and this is probably a Google campus, like most campuses. UCLA is a Google campus. Everything is Google. And I find that people either are like, yeah, that's right, or they're like, why are you talking about my mama? So it's like it's a thing, it's like a dance here, because most people are so in love with Google, or they relate to the brand like it's them. So I want to invite you to maybe set that to the side for a moment. And even our moms have flaws. I don't know, our big brothers, I don't know. So let's just jump in, and I'll share with you some things that I've been thinking about. So first, surveillance society and resistance. This is probably one of I'm teaching a course right now. I'm actually teaching two courses, one on surveillance and society. It's a film course. And I'm teaching another class called Trump, Clinton, and the Politics of Disinformation. And that's not a fun class, but there's lots of information already on a daily basis that's filling up the content of that course. But I'm interested in kind of the resistance part, and I want you to be thinking about like what could we do differently, or how, and not just how would we make Google different, but how would we imagine our societies and our public sphere in some different ways, all right? So I want you to just kind of keep that idea in the back of your mind. All right, I'm going to kick this off by talking first about Google Glass. Because Google Glass, as many of you know, is kind of considered a failure, right? I think even Google would say, it wasn't ready for prime time when we rolled it out. In fact, that isn't what they said. So let me share with you a little bit about what I've been thinking about Glass. So first, in April of 2014, the research firm Toluna reported that 72% of the public hated Google Glass, which is a wearable personal information assistant technology. And it was primarily due to privacy concerns based on its capacity for surveillance. Multiple reports of Google Glass wearers being attacked for wearing the technology in public have made headlines across the United States since Google first launched its exploratory beta to select users in spring of 2013. Now, Google Glass, as you can see, it's a head-mounted wearable optical technology that promised users to, quote, take pictures, record what you see hands-free, share what you see live, obtain directions, send messages, and ask whatever is on your mind. With a series of Google and third-party applications, Google Glass promised to be a technology that would allow the wearer to scan images and people in the user's line of sight and, quote, Google them, which we all do. I know you all Googled me before I got here because I actually get the notices, so it's fine. I know the IP address and everything, it's cool. Using the massive data power of the Google search engine to provide more information to the wearer about objects and people captured in the Google Glass gaze. Google marketed it as a tool of freedom, with a powerful video depicting a series of experiences that can be captured hands-free to foster a greater sense of participation and power over one's informational and geospatial environment that one can experience, you can't experience in the same way holding a smartphone. But what is Google Glass? And why does it engender such emotion among those who both love and hate the technology? So in this talk today, I want to discuss the implications of large-scale multinational platforms, namely Google, and some of its failures from wearable technologies like Google Glass that function as a tool for occupying, commodifying, and profiting from the biological, psychological, and emotional data of its wearers. And critically, from those who fall within its gaze, we're going to step over to look at some Google search. I want to offer up Glass as a case study that we can learn from through its first round of failure, and also look at search today in an attempt to educate you about the many ways that we need to think more critically about the products and projects we are so rapidly embracing. So Google Glass has a fundamental design flaw that privileges an imaginary of whiteness. I'm just going to go right in. I'm just going to go right into the what's happening. All right, I'm not going to pull any punches here. This imaginary in the design of Google Glass really privileges whiteness and an unbridled exploration, and I would even argue intrusion into the physical and emotional space of others. The dominant narrative of Google Glass, as evinced through its marketing strategy, posits its wearers as explorers. This is a very familiar colonial narrative. This disposition maps onto the current processes of radical gentrification and displacement in many San Francisco neighborhoods and signals that power, whiteness, and class elitism are core values in the Google Glass design imaginary. In fact, Glass's recognizable aesthetic and outward-facing camera has elicited intense emotional responses, particularly when exploration has taken place in areas of San Francisco occupied by residents who are finding themselves priced out of or evicted from their homes to make way for the techno elite. And of course, everyone in this room knows all about that. I used to live in Oakland for 13 years. It's fine. I love Oakland, and I don't recognize the Bay Area after having been away for about 13 years. You know, it's different. I was here for the first boom and bust, so yes, I'm old. Google Glass arrived at a time when Google, headquartered in Mountain View, California, had already incited people feeling the economic and emotional ramifications of the changing landscape of the San Francisco Bay Area, as the latest tech boom has pushed people out of affordable housing via evictions. Landlords across California, but particularly in San Francisco, have taken great advantage of the Ellis Act during the most recent techno boom in housing, allowing them to clear out tenants out of their multiple unit dwellings, often rent controlled, by claiming that the landlord is going out of business. This strategy is typically used to convert apartment buildings into high-priced condominiums. In other cases, landlords cleared out buildings multiple times under the guise of going out of business to perpetually increase rents. These practices have made new and existing housing unaffordable for those residents not employed in high-paying sectors such as the tech industries or finance. Indeed, Newsweek reported that, quote, in 2005, after new technology companies like Google began attracting thousands of high-paid employees to the Bay, the number of Ellis evictions tripled. In 2013, Ellis evictions grew 175% from the year before. Google in particular has received special ire not only because of perceptions of its presence being responsible for Ellis evictions, but also due to its ubiquitous fleet of luxury buses and their impact on life in the Bay Area. These coaches move San Franciscans who labor at its Mountain View corporate headquarters to and fro every day in private Wi-Fi-enabled air-conditioned comfort. And I've written extensively about this with my colleague Sarah Roberts, who's now also at UCLA. This is a picture from a book chapter that we wrote about Google Glass. And it's a little dark, it's hard to see now that I see it up here on the screen, but these are people who are literally saying, warning, illegal use of public infrastructure. That's what the sign says, right? Where they're trying to block these fleets of air-conditioned buses. Now, according to the master's thesis of city planner Alexandra Goldman, rents at apartments near Google bus stops rose 20% during a period where the average rent increase was 5%. Included in our evidence were Craigslist ads denoting the presence of the Google bus stops as a perk for apartments located nearby. Apple, eBay, Twitter, Electronic Arts, Facebook, and Yahoo, among many others, also run private bus lines, which have been protested by local residents. Indeed, Google and many high-tech companies in Silicon Valley have directly contributed to gentrification in previously multiracial neighborhoods in the San Francisco Bay Area. A challenge of gentrification is that it brings new wine bars, vape shops, restaurants, and boutiques to areas that might previously not have had such high-end amenities. But gentrification has always been a narrative of improvement that draws upon a mystique of transforming previously uninhabitable places into spaces that can be occupied. Like colonial projects of the past that seek an expansion into new territories and locales, despite there already being inhabitants of those spaces, gentrification is hailed as offering an improvement or reinvestment into neighborhoods that, when occupied by low-income people of color, were seen as not valuable or not necessarily productive. As San Francisco is overrun with tech workers, the majority of whom are white and Asian men with lucrative salaries and stock options, the city is experiencing hyper-gentrification, a term coined by policy analysts who watch the millionaires produced at local tech giant Twitter buy up all the middle-income housing, displacing urban residents. While the private coach services do offer reduced greenhouse gas emissions versus all 4,500 riders taking private vehicles, they have also monopolized local public transit bus stops in the Muni system, initially without remuneration to the city, although that's changing, and are part of a series of other notorious soft benefits at Google that appear egregious to those who do not work in similar tech industry settings. In short, the Google bus and Google employees at ferries back and forth to Silicon Valley have become highly visible symbols of class division in San Francisco. In response, locals have gone so far as to block buses from moving or stopping for pickups and smashing bus windows. So there's something about this design imaginary, right, about kind of this particular tech company, but as I look at other tech companies, we have a similar kind of imaginary where previously there was nothing, or what was there wasn't good enough. And we have this kind of narrative of innovation, of exploration. This is, typical of kind of these modernity projects. And this is something that I think is coming, we're seeing over and over in tech corridors in particular. We're certainly seeing this in Los Angeles now with the advent of Silicon Beach. I don't know if you knew that we've got Silicon Beach, y'all. And it's, an expansion because housing, quite frankly, is not affordable in the Bay Area, and so people are coming in. And I'm here to tell you that LA is also being hyper-gentrified. Now, there's something else about Google Glass, and that's this kind of idea of the panoptic gaze. And I'm sure because you're here at St. Mary's and you're getting a phenomenal education, you have read Foucault, because you can't actually get a liberal arts education without reading Foucault. If you haven't gotten to it yet, trust me, you will. Foucault, right, has talked about kind of the panopticon and really thinking about this role, right? He talks about, this prison and the way in which prisoners are kind of always under surveillance and they're able to surveil each other. And then this is kind of a diagram of what that vision looks like. These kind of utopian discourses of freedom that I was previously alluding to through technology are not new. Critical geography scholars have written extensively about hierarchies of power, how these are reproduced and enacted through digital technologies. And they point to the ways in which the informationalization and digitization of everyday life heightens control and surveillance, but also establishes digital enclosures with power-laden boundaries across race, gender, and class. Technological projects are never neutral, and Google Glass certainly is not a tool of freedom despite its marketing discourse. Indeed, the most controversial aspect of Google Glass has been its outward-facing camera, allowing users to record things within their field of vision, which the camera then follows. Concerns have ranged from the potential theft of ATM passcodes by passersby wearing glass to the illegal infringements of glass wearers recording copyrighted material in movie theaters, or the potential for cheating in Las Vegas casinos, which have banned wearers. And I know some of you are thinking, why hadn't I thought of that? That was such a good idea. Video resulting from all of these potential uses of the technology could easily be uploaded real-time or streamed to the internet to be circulated, stored, and owned by glass wearers, all without the consent of anyone within the gaze of Google Glass. Consistently, critics and news reports have largely leveled critiques at the product as an important site of the fight to resist hypersurveillance and privacy concerns. So Google Glass is back in the lab. It's being worked on. So now you've got the primer for when it's rolled back out and how to potentially think about it. In the chapter that Sarah and I wrote, we bring attention to glass holes, which is what Google Glass wearers have often been called by people who don't appreciate the glass. These glass holes, get them out of here. And this is artwork that was done by an organization that was really trying to raise awareness. And restaurants and bars, places were putting these posters, no Google Glass, in their restaurants and in their local businesses. And so you could see these, especially in like Seattle and other large cities. We argue, are the glass holes also class holes? Because on many levels, the tensions that have existed really reflect the growing distrust between the discourses of Google as a company for everyday people, providing seemingly free services that improve the quality of our lives while asking for nothing in return. But Jay McGregor, writing for Forbes.com, said, Google has suffered an image problem since it was accused of providing a backdoor to the National Security Administration, the NSA, in Snowden documents. Right, so people have started now to question whether Google really can be trusted like your mom. So these are some of the kinds of challenges that Google's been facing. And these real-life contradictions, like selling the public out to the NSA or gentrifying low-income neighborhoods of color, are where the imaginary of Google's utopian benevolence are made most clear. And I think this is one of the ways in which we have to kind of deal with the digitality, right? We think of these technology companies as providing kind of a digital service that we don't see or that doesn't have any material consequences. But I've tried to share with you some of the more material aspects of what tech companies, which of course many of you I'm sure know, but the material consequences are certainly enacted in different ways for different people. Right? So here's an example of how that's happening kind of with the company here in the Bay Area, but I want to talk about also what happens kind of in the digital space. All right. So here are some of Google's misrepresentations. I usually kick this off and you see first a slide that kind of led me to, but I'm saving it for a minute. So I started in 2009 collecting searches on various racialized and gendered identities. So I was looking for Black girls, Asian girls, Latina girls, Black women. I searched about 80 different combinations. You know, people always ask, they're like, what about the white men or the white women? And of course, like, we searched and collected there, although it is interesting to note that, you know, the default kinds of results that come back for men and women are white. And so really people who name white people are non-white people, right? It's just because white people don't typically name themselves as white when they're thinking about their own identities. This is a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to share it with you. So this is a couple years ago, 3 years ago almost. These are Google's, and these are very similar today. If you search on the term Asian girls, I don't know why this one's so blurry, I apologize. It's Asian girls, porn, and sex pictures and movies is the first hit. Followed by Asian girls Tumblr, which is, again, kind of sexually provocative images of Asian girls. Followed by Asian porn, Japanese porn, movies with hot Asian girls on sex, Tumblr. Online dating, Asian dating, Philippines dating, Filipino women. Why Asian girls go for white guys on YouTube. Asian girls aren't shy, RedTube, free amateur porn videos. All right, for Latina girls, Match.com official site, which in the way that it's, you know, it's not yellow boxed or anything, so it actually, many people are confused if there isn't kind of a clarity that this is an ad. Many people will think this is part of what Google calls its like organic search. Hot Latina girls on Facebook, hot Latina girls on Pinterest, Latina girl twerking on YouTube, the 50 hottest Latinas in Complex, 5 girl on top sex positions he will never forget. All right, so this is the way that girls of color get misrepresented in searches. And this is quite typical and has been for several years that I've been tracing this. We've had teams of researchers that I've worked with who are collecting searches in various places on machines that don't have digital traces, right? So where you haven't been logged into Facebook for 5 years on it and it's monitoring your every move. We really tried to imagine a space that wasn't particularly tainted with our digital traces, although obviously the IP address is traceable. Many of these were taken, these results that I'll show you, Some were taken in the Midwest, some were in California, and some in Wisconsin. So one of the things I was really troubled by when I started collecting results is how is it that this can be the first page of real estate for girls of color? And that's what led me to writing the book, Algorithms of Oppression, is really trying to piece apart. Now, we can't see Google's algorithms because they're proprietary. All we can do, those of us who are in information and communication studies, is we're trying to reverse engineer. We're trying to talk about the cultural artifact and the import of what you find, even if we can't figure out exactly what all of the factors were in Google's development of the search results and what it would prioritize. Now, what's important to know is that information studies scholars will tell you that the first page of results is the most important. The majority of the public does not go past the first page. So what's there actually kind of functions as a cultural reality or a truth-telling. Now, what also you need to know is that Pew Research has done amazing following and tracking of people who use search engines. And Pew found that 73% of the public believes that what they find in a search engine is accurate and trustworthy. So this is, again, the context within which search results often are derived is that people believe that Google it and I'm going to get the answer. There's already an always acceptance of this platform as being neutral, as being objective, right, as providing some type of truth. In fact, I talk to teachers often who are in training, and I tell them, stop telling your students to just Google it until you do exercises, especially when you start getting around complex ideas. If you want to find out what time Starbucks closes, definitely Google it. All right, I'm not going to hate on that. You have to, I mean, there are certain kinds of banal information that Google is excellent at providing for us. And that's one of the reasons why it bolsters our trust, right? It engenders our trust because it's going to really tell us is Zachary still open? Because I got to get a slice. You see? I know the Bay. It's fine. All right, just messing with you. Okay. Here's another story. So that's a fail, all right? This is a fail in search. Now here you have a story picked up last summer by the Washington Post. And what was happening, DeRay McKesson, who's kind of a well-known personality on Twitter, tweeted out, if you Google map the N-word house, this is what you'll find, America. And what was happening is that if you went into Google Maps and you searched on the phrase nigga house, you would be taken to the White House. Also, if you did the N-word king, take you right to the White House. So Google, DeRay tweeted this and went viral, and the Washington Post picked it up, and Google offered a very familiar kind of apology. It says, some inappropriate results are surfacing in Google Maps that should not be. We apologize for any offense this may have caused, as if maybe it didn't cause offense. Also, when my husband says, I'm sorry if you're offended, I never really feel fully apologized to you, but that's just me. Maybe no one else has that experience. All right, so our teams are working to fix this issue quickly. And this is a very typical kind of tech company response, which is in our otherwise perfectly functioning system, we have a glitch, a momentary glitch. And we're going to fix that, and we're going to go back to perfection. All right, and so this is one of the reasons why I collect the failures, to try to dislodge this idea that we can just blindly trust in these platforms. Here you have Kabir Ali, who's a teenager. You probably saw this. This was a big story last summer. Kabir Ali his friend's video is digitally recording him as he searches for 3 black teenagers. And in the video, Kabir says, okay, now let's see what happens when we change one word. Let's change black to white. So when he did a search on 3 black teenagers, as you can see, he gets mostly mugshots. And then he changes the word black to white, and he gets all-American, iconographic, stock photography of lovely white kids playing soccer and basketball at the same time, I guess. So I don't know, it's weird. I don't feel like it doesn't go together. I don't know, a glove and a bat, it's fine. I'm not in the Getty Images world, so I can't control it. So he tells us, this tweet goes viral, right? And everyone is like, in fact, Jessica Gwynn at USA Today wrote a really good article about this, right? And about, what does it mean that these kinds of, again, misrepresentations are happening. And I have many, many examples of this in the book. The next day, Bob's Burgers guy on Twitter notices that Google has changed the algorithm. And now we have a young white man in custody. And we've got, I don't know, is this like an early new edition? I don't know what's happening over here. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like a thing is happening. All right, so then we get some college students or high school kids, and it's responding, right? It's responding to the critique. Now, typically what's happened in the past is that, Google has often said, we're not responsible for the results because there are so many factors that go into the kinds of results that can emerge on the front page of a search. And, my response to that in the media has been, if Google's not responsible for its algorithm, who is? I mean, that's just point blank. We are not writing it. They have a very elaborate video about, their ideas lab and over 200 different factors going into the development of algorithms. And one of the factors that's not going in is kind of, race and gender sensitivity. We can definitely say that is not one of the factors because typically, again and again, we see the glitches and the errors, whose expense they come at. And I'm going to underscore this even more in a moment. Here's another viral, The Guardian picked this story up, another kind of viral tweet. I saw a tweet saying, Google unprofessional hairstyles for work, and I did, then I checked the professional ones. So when you searched for unprofessional hairstyles in Google Images, you got back all pictures of black women, which I want to acknowledge that I'm wearing my hair unprofessionally today, according to Google search results, is fine. And then, here again, professional hairstyles for work are mostly reflecting white women. And again, I think that, this is a complex phenomenon because, we think about what would it take to curate a different point of view in the kinds of results that we get rather than leaving it to kind of deep machine learning, which is what we have now, right? This idea that algorithms somehow eventually will become better thinkers than us. But of course, this so-called artificial intelligence is trying to replicate our best thinking, but our best thinking is already absent in many of these projects. And so this is something that I think is worth thinking about. Now, here's where I kind of started. In 2011, when I was doing a search on black girls, sugary black pussy, I'm gonna say pussy a bunch of times right now, and I'm just gonna say I'm sorry, and I'm just gonna try to shoot through this part because sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. So here we have sugaryblackpussy.com, Black Girls in Hardcore Action Galleries. Now in 2009, when I first started collecting these results, hotblackpussy.com was first, but I guess they went out of business or sugary eclipsed. These adjectives, they're interesting. This is followed by Black Girls, Free Music, Tour Dates, Photos. This is a UK band of white guys who call themselves the Black Girls. Does anybody know them? No one ever knows them, but they are so good at search engine optimization and terrible at marketing their music. So no one ever knows who they are. I'm not kidding you, it's like trippy. Okay, followed by Two Black Girls Love Cock, RedTube, Free Big Tits, porn videos, followed by Black Girls, Big Booty Black Girls, Black Porn, Black Pussy. This is with the default settings, okay? Not on campus, but like in a coffee shop, okay? Black Girls, 100% free Black Girls chat. Black Girls, our UK band Facebook page, they're winning at search when it comes to Black Girls. So there are 2 times on the front page. Black Girls, Ebony Sex Threesome, Pornhub, Black Girl with Long Hair, which is a blog. Okay, so this is what's happening for several years, and this is really where I started. And I wanted to write about this. I want to write about this for Essence Magazine. Essence Magazine is a magazine that caters to African American women and women of color here in the United States because I thought it was a really important critical information lesson. Teach your kids, right? And also prepare them Because listen, besides just preparing your kids that they're going to find porn in a minute as soon as they get on the internet and you don't have all your filters on and you don't have it all locked down, they're also going to find terrible misrepresentations of themselves that are going to be confusing, that need to be explained. And it's difficult to explain when even parents think Google's giving them good information. So I wrote it, I couldn't get, Essence was not interested because they're like, who are you? I don't know who you are. And that you can't write for Essence when no one knows who you are. So Bitch Magazine, which is very popular here in the Bay Area, some of you might follow it, they were doing a special issue on cyberspace. And I wrote to them and I said, this is it, you gotta let me write this article. And they said, no, everybody knows when you search for girls, you get porn. Do they? I was like, do they? But it's a thing, like there's more to it. And they said, no, it's not a story. Because we know that the internet is sexist. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. I want you to do a search on women's magazines and tell me if Bitch Magazine comes back in the first 5 pages. And they were like, all right, Noble, you could write the story. So thank God, I'm really grateful to them. So I wrote this about what search engines say about women. And of course, here we have women's magazines divorced from the concept of feminism. So that no feminist magazines come up when you search for women's magazines. Well, what does that mean? If that isn't political, I don't know what is. And so this is something that, of course, immediately, people started kind of paying attention to that were interested in gender studies and feminism and human rights. And I wrote an academic piece about that, and so you can check it out if you're interested. All right, so now I'm going to kind of start to wrap here for you, and I want to share one more failure. Now, this is a little more sobering, and not to say that I don't think that pornographic misrepresentations of women and girls of color is not important, because it is terribly important, but I think there are many layers of examination about kind of the information landscape. When I was writing about this all these years, and it was about like the way that bad information was misrepresenting women and girls of color, nobody was really interested. But then when bad information through a presidential election, everybody got interested. So it's kind of timely that here we are kind of still grappling with the consequences of misinformation and in some cases disinformation. So here I want to share with you the case of Dylan Stormroof. And I just wrote about this. I had a piece come out on Monday, I think, of this week in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, which is just kind of a short synopsis of what I'm going to share with you here. All right, so if you don't know, on the evening of June 17th, 2015, in Charleston, South Carolina, a 21-year-old white nationalist, Dylan Stormroof, opened fire on unsuspecting African-American worshipers, Christian worshipers at Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in one of the most heinous racial and religious hate crimes of recent memory. And the location of the murders was not chosen in vain by Roof, because Mother Emanuel Church really stood as one of the oldest symbols of African-American freedom in the United States. Emanuel AME was organized by free and enslaved Black and African people in 1791, where you may or may not know its membership grew so significantly that by 1822, it was burned down by white South Carolinians who had heard that church member Denmark Vesey was organizing a slave revolt. So this church is very important in the history of African Americans, particularly as a symbol of freedom. And this was the site where Dylan Roof decided to open up fire and murder these worshipers, and so these community members. So immediately people started looking for answers, motivations from Dylan Roof. And someone on Twitter found what the FBI later verified as the manifesto of Dylan Roof at thelastRhodesian.com. I immediately started pouring through this, like I'm sure many researchers were doing, and just people trying to make sense of this. And this was the part of his manifesto that jumped out to me. And I wrote a whole chapter in my book about this. He says, in his words, "The event that truly awakened me was the Trayvon Martin case. I kept hearing and seeing his name, and eventually I decided to look him up. I read the Wikipedia article, and right away I was unable to understand what the big deal was. It was obvious that Zimmerman was in the right. But more importantly, this is my emphasis added, but more importantly, this prompted me to type in the words black on white crime into Google, and I have never been the same since that day. The first website I came to was the Council of Conservative Citizens. There were pages upon pages of these brutal black on white murders. I was in disbelief. At this moment, I realized that something was very wrong. How could the news be blowing up the Trayvon Martin case while hundreds of these black on white murders got ignored? From this point, I researched deeper and found out what was happening in Europe. I saw that the same things were happening in England and France and all the other Western European countries. Again, I found myself in disbelief. As an American, we are taught to accept living in the melting pot, and black and other minorities have just as much right to be here as we do, since we are all immigrants. But Europe is the homeland of white people, and in many ways, the situation is even worse there. From here, I found out about the Jewish problem and other issues facing our race, and I can say today that I am completely racially aware. Now, when you do a search on black on white crime, at the time that I was writing the chapter a few months ago, you do get the Council on Conservative Citizens, and I had several people test this out around the country to see if it was true for them too. If you don't know about the Council of Conservative Citizens is really considered like it's like the businessman's KKK. You know, when you can't quite wear your robe, you need to wear the suit. Then you join a white citizens council or a Council on Conservative Citizens. Council of Conservative Citizens online really functions, their website looks like what Jessie Daniels in her amazing book, Cyber Racism, which is on display in your library, and everyone should go check it out. She writes about cloaked websites, and these are websites that kind of pretend to be one thing, but are in fact thinly veiled white supremacist websites. Council on Conservative Citizens is, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks hate crimes and hate groups in the United States, they call them unrepentantly racist as an organization. So they hold and occupy the first position when you do a search on black on white crime. Now here's what's interesting. You can very quickly go down a rabbit hole into what you think are at first conservative news opinion pieces, and then very quickly you're in just kind of emboldened racist material. What you don't get, though, is a counterpoint when you search on a phrase like black on white crime. So you don't get, for example, Black studies or African American studies scholarship that would debunk this phrase as a phrase that is used in service of attracting and recruiting white supremacists into organizations. You also don't get FBI statistics that show that, in fact, the majority of white Americans are killed by other white Americans, just as the majority of African Americans are killed by African Americans, because propinquity, who you live near, is actually a major factor in who will kill you. And we know that we have highly racially segregated neighborhoods for the most part all over the United States. And so even though you haven't ever heard the phrase white on white crime, I'm giving it to you here today. It's yours to use freely, but this is in fact the phenomenon that the Council on Conservative Citizens does not want to, in fact, share. There's no information on the first page that is trying to contextualize and make sense of what a phrase like this means. And so this is where we start to see more failures. The idea that we could put in complex ideas and notions into a commercial search engine and think that it will deliver us back sophisticated, nuanced answers is part of, I think, the acculturation that we need to be resisting. Quite frankly, it's great for finding out the banal, but there are types of knowledge and information that have been contested for thousands of years. Thousands of years. It's one of the reasons why we have a university, because this is a place where we debate ideas, we use research, we look for evidence, we try to make sense of over long periods of time. That's what the library is also about, our knowledge stores. Search engines don't acculturate us toward that. They acculturate us to having an answer in 0.03 seconds. So this is part of what I'm trying to caution us around and have us think about. And of course, in these highly commercial environments, where advertising is actually the driving logic of how information is organized, then it becomes even more precarious. It's one of the reasons why the pornography industry owns women, so to speak, owns our identities. We will not amass enough capital to battle that. The porn industry has a lot of money. If this is a battle of capital, people who are in the margins will lose. People who are in the minority will lose. All right. One of the last things I want to say is that we have more data and technology than ever, and we also have more inequality to go with it, and injustice. Since we've been recording social inequality, last year, record high in global social inequality. At the same time, we have these kinds of logics and discourses that technology will liberate us from that. And I think these are, again, places where we need to pause, particularly now when we're in an information environment that we're not even sure that we can trust. That's even more precarious than we may have thought of before. So these are some of the things that we can learn from digital fails. One last thing that I want you to think about in terms of this materiality. So I opened up this talk with talking about gentrification and some of the kind of material aspects of the ways that people are dealing with tech companies and their dominance in our culture. But I'm also thinking about, and this is a kind of a recent collection that I put together with some really smart people who are doing great work around intersectionality and the internet at both the material level, like infrastructure, and in terms of representation and misrepresentation. And it's truly intersectional. There are a lot of great points of view here. My work is now taking me, I've kind of been here in this kind of North American context of thinking about Google and writing about Google, but really the next project is thinking about the entire global supply chain for our digital technologies. So here you have, for example, coltan miners. These are people who are mining for coltan. Coltan is a very important mineral. You have to have it in order to make electronics. And the Congo is now declared by the United Nations as the worst site of sexual violence on the planet. And part of that has to do with the mineral wars that are happening there that are, again, hidden from our sight, not in our line of vision, and I'm trying to bring this out to the fore. What would it look like I often ask my students, here I have it, because I get engineering and computer science students, and some of you might be that too. I say to my students, design this, here's the design challenge, design this so that no one dies, so that no human labor is exploited. Super hard. That's a design challenge, all right? Not how do we just make a retina display, okay? So I'm starting an ethnography of talking to people who work in the Congo around mining industries. And then really what we have in the United States has been, for the most part, a bypassing of black labor in the tech sector. So you see a few kind of handfuls of people who are black who are working in the tech sector. But for the most part, because of globalization and the outsourcing of manufacturing, which used to be the primary site of where black people were engaged in work, was in unionized manufacturing labor, because so much of that has left the United States, we have really a bypassing of black labor. But then I'm looking again at the end of the supply chain, and what we have are, when the iPhone 25 comes out, where did all the versions go? Where are they going now? Most of us think, well, we just send our old tech to the recycling center, and we don't really know. We assume it gets disposed of properly. But typically what happens is it's all, it's all put on a barge, it's, in containers, and it's sent over to places that are out of sight in the global north. And so we have huge, for example, e-waste cities all along the west coast of Africa, in Ghana in particular, where the land is literally dying as a result of the toxins that are coming out of our electronics, and the water being contaminated. And so you don't have to actually go to Ghana to see contaminated water, right? You can see that right here in Flint, Michigan. And so we have to think about these connections between the environment and our over-reliance, or maybe hyper-reliance upon technologies. And these are complicated, complex conversations and divestments even potentially that we might have to make. And what would that mean? What would the alternatives be? So here's some things I think that we can learn from digital fails and that I want to just leave with you. First is like how to think about these issues. I think at the foremost, in the front, what I teach my students at UCLA and in my field are to reject these ideas of information and technology as neutral. They're just not, and I hope that I've given you enough evidence here in this short time to see the ways in which technologies are not operating in these kind of neutral spaces. I think it's also really important to embrace these critical perspectives, and by that I mean looking for a power analysis, being more mindful and thoughtful about what our information and technology landscape looks like, and especially paying attention to these commercially biased information sources. And of course, this is all over the news right now with the conversations about news around Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and how people got their news, and the teenagers in Macedonia putting up fake sites, right? So there's like so much happening around this, but I think pay attention to that. This is really crucial when we start talking about how to make sense of the world that we're living in. I would encourage you also, for those of you who are already engaged in action, if you stay in action, if you haven't been in action, get in action. Part of it is to start with resisting black box technologies. So bringing these platforms onto our campuses, I mean, there are only a handful of us, trust me, at UCLA who are trying to say, let's think about what the long-term consequences of the data mining of our students, right? Because that is a part of what's happening when we make these kind of trades. Yeah, it's expensive to run local servers, but it might be more expensive, the trade-offs that we're making right now in the future that we are only beginning to get a glimpse into. I think eliminating the kind of technology overdevelopment and e-waste. Do we have to upgrade all the time? Are there some things, whatever happened to paper or these other analog ways that we can come to learn and know? Are there ways that we can rethink some of those investments? I think making research visible to the public is very important, and I'm certainly trying to do that with my own work. But this idea that evidence and research, that we have the information, this is not just a matter of opinion, we have the evidence, and we need to really foreground that to the public. And then, more than anything, we really have to be diligent in championing credible information. It's really the foundation of our democracy. Herb Schiller, who's a great scholar of information, he warned in the 90s, before we had the internet in the current kind of commercial form that we had, that the foreclosing of and the consolidation of media companies was the primary threat to democracy. And you see that other researchers, more recently, Epstein and Robertson, did a great study about how easy it is to manipulate the public with bad information and the threat that this is to our democracy. And many of us maybe feel we're living in that very moment, and some of us may not. And so I would just encourage you to keep your eyes wide open with respect to this. Thank you. Did I eat up all the time? Did I eat up all the time for questions? We're still good? Okay, great. Okay, I'll do my best.
Great. If anyone has any questions, or comments or thoughts, I can pass around the mic. Got one in the back.
Hello.
Hi.
This is great research, first of all, and congratulations on your forthcoming book. I have two questions. Number one, what are you suggesting that companies like Google do to address some of these issues? And number two, isn't altering the internet in any way considered censorship?
I want to start with that. That's
okay.
A great question. All right, so the first thing is the internet is always censored. It's always being censored. Right now as we speak, it's being censored, if you want to call that. We have a whole industry. In fact, just this morning, there was a great article in CNN's Money section that my colleague who I mentioned earlier, Sarah Roberts, contributed to, because her work is on commercial content moderators. So there's a whole shadowy underworld of contract workers who do deeply psychologically damaging work. It's psychologically damaging to themselves. These are the people who screen for the beheadings of animals, the murders, the murder videos, the snuff videos, these kinds of things that get put up on the internet all the time. There's a whole class of people working around the world in very precarious and dangerous kind of psychological and emotional environments doing that work. So that's already always happening. Even the notion that the internet is free and anything goes. Listen, put something super controversial or radical on Facebook and watch it come down, okay? So it's not it's not that censorship isn't happening. I think the value systems, though, that are at play in various countries really determine what's allowed to flourish, all right, in that community. So for example, Google in France and Germany cannot surface anti-Semitic or neo-Nazi or Nazi information, okay? That's German and French law, that we don't traffic in that, and you cannot make money off of that. So eBay and Amazon have had to deal with this too, with people selling this kind of paraphernalia, and it can't. So the value system there is encoded in a particular way that is not encoded in the United States, right? In fact, racist and sexist and homophobic material gets a lot of clicks, even by people who object to it. But here's the problem. The more it's clicked on and shared and circulating, the more profitable it is. The more profitable it is, the more likely we're going to see it. Okay, so this is part of the complexity of dealing with this material, right? I think that as long as you have advertising or a commercial environment mediating, the auction is going to go to the highest bidder, right? The keywords get auctioned to the highest bidders. And that's a very different model than, say, our librarians would take up as a model for prioritizing or organizing information, right? So that's, your second question. All right, so your first question, what's Google supposed to do about it? Okay, Google's doing its business. I don't actually think Google is invested in this kind of research or these kinds of findings. It would be too much of a radical disruption to their business model to curate differently right now. So maybe, one of the things reporters ask me a lot, like, well, what should Google do? So, so the baby answer, the step A, part A, primer answer is people with master's degrees and PhDs in ethnic studies and gender studies and sociology should be sitting next to programmers, and they should be working together truly in an interdisciplinary way. Now, for those of us who do interdisciplinary research, it means I have to be conversant with computer scientists and engineers. They do not have to be conversant with me in African American studies. Okay, so this is an interesting power dynamic also. So I think that is a baby step that Microsoft, Google, Twitter, they could all take. Snapchat is hiring people with expertise. Now the typical response is there's not a pipeline of people of color, and therefore that's why they don't work in Silicon Valley. Jessica Gwynn, again at USA Today, has done amazing research and studies and shown in USA Today that that's just patently false, right? There's a huge pipeline. There are plenty of Black and Latino, for example, programmers ready to work. But that's insufficient because demographically, having a lived experience is not the same thing as understanding how to curate against white supremacy. That's actually a different skill set and a different training, a different eye that gets cultivated with your education. And that's something that I think they could do at a minimum. In my work, I'm interested in public interest search. So one of the things that I'm hoping, in my career, I will see an alternative to Google that would be based on the public interest and regulated as such. Right now, Google's unregulated. All these companies are unregulated, and that will continue for the next 4 years, at least.
Any others?
There. In the very back.
Use this? Okay. Yeah, so I just want to pick up on that idea of alternatives because I was reading last week about Project Xanadu, which is something that I hadn't known about before. I don't know if anybody else in the room is aware of that.
Will you
project.
tell them a little bit about it?
Ted Nelson and Project Xanadu. And I was thinking about this a lot over the last week, about the idea of alternatives to what we have, which is developed, as you say, in an unregulated manner by white people for white people. I understand all of those dynamics completely, but what I'm really interested in is this idea of threads that's, that Ted Nelson rejects within the current status of the internet. And in the examples of his work, what you see is the ability to look at one source and have absolutely immediately transparent for you all of the related resources connected to that one thing. So you could pull any quote out of the internet and you could find out everywhere it's attributed, where its origination was.
Right.
And do you have any understanding of the history of why that version of the internet was never realized?
Well, for those of us who are around in the early days, I remember when everyone was buying up like GM.com. Remember that? And everyone like owned every Ford.com before Ford and GM had figured out that they needed to be on the internet. This idea of like the property ownership model is what really took root on the early web. And that persists. So this is the idea like that I could buy Doug's, the URL to his name and I own it. And there's nothing Doug can do because property rights trump, right? So capital and property go hand in hand, and that's actually how the web formed. And part of that I think is in the tradition of the way US privatized communications projects have worked, right? So the telephone system, similar, right? It's wholly built out, the nation's telephone infrastructure built out by AT&T. And these public-private, which now we might just call private-private because of the way in which the state has changed, the government has changed, that's been a fundamental model for most of our major infrastructure projects. So I think that's why the web, developed in such a manner. This idea, though, of contextualizing information is super important, and I do want to kind of pick that part of your comment up. As I think about or imagine, and this might be like in some talk that I've given, I didn't put the slide in here, but you could find this on the web, it's in the book. I imagine an interface that could contextualize what we're finding, which is something we can't do now. Because here's again, the already always way of thinking about credibility is through ranking. So if I ask everybody in this room, what does it mean if I say we're number one? You know what that means. So if a search result is ranked first, it's in a context, in the US in particular, of meaning. And if it's search, result 2 million, no one cares because it's considered irrelevant. In an interface, the interface, and many people talk about interfaces, Alex Galloway, Alex Halavey, I talk about that if you could design interfaces also in a way that could contextualize. So let's say if we did that search on black girls think of like a big color picker tool, right? That's the red and the green and the gradations of color, right? If you dropped black girls in the red light district of the internet, you'd know what you're getting. But maybe if you dropped it over here in blue, let's say blue is government information. Let's say green is advertising-oriented products, services. And let's say, black is like the authentic space. This would be another way of thinking about this, like threading or contextualizing information. And I think this is, this would be really, someone is listening to my talks and they're gonna build it and it's just gonna happen because I don't have millions of dollars to build it myself. But I do imagine, what if all the academic librarians, right, my colleagues here, we partnered with the Library of Congress. And we, again, built with that type of a massive database. I mean, one of the challenges for us is that librarians who've curated information, not perfectly by any stretch, we have critiques of our own field, but they have used different organizing logics. We have not applied those logics to the open web. So we've really contained ourselves within the world of scholarly information and popular kind of, fiction and nonfiction, but science. We haven't really gone out and dealt with the open web and tried to curate that. That would be a phenomenal project for librarians, I think, to take up. To try to, again, get a sense of what are we talking about. This is the challenge. Okay, Sergey Brin, when he writes in like his graduate paper about developing like hypertext, right, and how it's going to work. It's directly borrowed from library science. It's a library science bibliometric project, right? They say, listen, this is what scholars do. We have an article. We write an article. We say, listen, I'm gonna cite Gail's paper in that, and then I'm citing these people, all the people's names that I've given you today. They'll be cited in my work. Well, here's what you don't know. You don't know if I railed on that work and said this is terrible work. It should not. All you know is it's cited. There's no context. So we have this challenge in our own field, right? And that's the model that was applied to Google search. So it's already broken from the start, and it also doesn't have even the nuance because these guys were not librarians, right? And thinking through it in those ways.
Coming with the mic.
I suppose it's more of a comment, but one I hope you think is worth responding to. You mentioned this page is number one, say for a search. One of the cores of Google's algorithm is the ones that come up first are the ones that most people are visiting.
Yes.
So in some sense, those searches become a reflection of the mass, us.
Yeah, on some level, but not entirely, okay? So I concede that popularity is but one factor. Now, the challenge is if you are part of a marginalized community, you will never have the majority to ever influence your representation. If they're more racist than there are anything else, that's what's gonna dominate, right? The patriarchy dominates, white supremacy dominates, because those things are also predominant in our societies. So granted, for sure, that's happening. Matthew Hinman wrote this great book called The Myth of Digital Democracy a few years ago, and he talked about the way in which capital is playing a significant role. Because you can also buy your way to the top, and we see this all the time, right? And that's the game, in fact, that everyone's trying to get in on, is how to game the system. And Google's got its work cut out for them, quite frankly, because I know this is one of the major issues facing the Google search engineers, is to stop the gamification, that not letting that. But it's complex because, again, it has its own AdWords advertising program that's fostering that and encouraging people to buy ads and link it up with their content. So you see, it's not straightforward, and I don't think it's just a matter of the worst material circulates to the top because we're the worst. Okay, I'm not ready to concede that on humanity yet. You know what I mean? Okay.
Any student questions or comments?
Come on, students, where are you at? All right.
Hi.
Hi.
So is it just Google that does this, or is it like Yahoo and Bing? Do they have the same issues as well?
Yeah, Yahoo and Bing has the same issues. People often ask me, why don't you study Yahoo and Bing? And it's like, why? No one's really using them. So it's not a good use of the public's taxpayer dollars to do that kind of research on that. I mean, Bing and Yahoo are always trying to mimic what Google's doing. I mean, you saw Microsoft got busted a few years ago for just scraping, Google's results and populating their own search engine with it. So it's not really, it's more important to study the monopoly leader. And Google isn't the monopoly leader, and so that's why we have to. And that's another issue when we talk about public interest. We have previously in different political administrations really had a strong stance on behalf of the public about not letting monopolies control industries, particular segments of the industries. But in the tech sector, it's much more unregulated than other sectors. And we won't, I had hoped we would see something different, but now it might take longer. Thank you all so much. I don't see any more. I'll hang around. Oh, okay, right here. I was going to say I'll hang around for a few minutes too. Sometimes people are too shy.
I am shy, but I'll still ask.
Good.
I was wondering about net neutrality and how you think that if that's revoked, how that's going to influence these searches in the future.
It's going to make it significantly worse because a two-tiered internet where you can kind of buy different levels of speed, bandwidth, what have you, will ensure that those with the most capital circulate easier, right? More easily than they already kind of do. So I think that'll be a big issue. Again, I mean, in some ways, this might be the perfect time for us to reinvigorate our passion for public organizations rather than kind of leaving the entire information landscape that we're reliant upon to an advertising company. I mean, quite frankly, Google Search is an advertising company. The end. I mean, you probably teach it as such, right, in business school. So relating to it as an information, a valid, credible, like it's like the online library is ludicrous. It's inappropriate. It's a mismatch. So this is something that, you know, maybe with what's happened in the kind of recent few weeks here, maybe this will renew. I mean, we see people have a renewed passion and interest for protecting democracy and our public institutions. You know, this might be the groundswell that we need to raise these conversations and maybe imagine some alternatives. Yeah, it's a good question. It's a hard time. I haven't given this talk very much since the election, you guys, and certainly this is the first talk since the inauguration. It's hard. It's so much harder because sometimes I feel a little bit daunted by, you know, my ambitions to help be a part of changing the landscape. But, you know, I feel I got so much positive response from your faces today that it makes me feel like maybe, you know, maybe we're in this together and we'll be able to do our pieces where we are. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to leave your feedback on the little orange sheets. You can leave them in the back or on your chair. I have some pencils if you need a writing utensil.